Good morning, Washington. Thank you so much for joining us today for the second in our two-part series on disaster planning for older adults. September is National Preparedness Month, and while natural hazards and other disasters are becoming more prevalent, unfortunately, a lot of us just aren't as ready as we should be. In fact, a survey of older adults by AARP said that while 59% said they were confident that they could navigate an emergency, a majority of them have not put a plan together. And unfortunately, the reality is that older adults are often the hardest hit when natural disasters occur. However, most of them have not taken, which is why the population is the older adult population is growing, and we just haven't taken the steps that we should. Now, we know that planning for unexpected emergencies and disasters for the future can be daunting, and that is why we're here today with the wonderful experts that we have gathered. Tessa, can you throw up the slide? We'll walk through a little bit of what we're going to do today, and then we'll hand it off to our first expert and get started. So today we are going to talk about some of the natural hazards that are prevalent to Washington State, some of the resources and recommendations that Washington State has available for Washington residents, and information from our Office of Emergency Management. Tessa, go ahead to the next slide. And then we're going to hand it off to our other experts, and they're going to talk about preparing your home for natural disasters and things that you can take now to make sure that you're getting ready. And then while we have a lot of information to cover today, we're hoping to set aside a few minutes at the end that we can take your questions. So little housekeeping, if you have questions that come up that you would like to ask of our experts, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there are a couple of call-out bubbles where it says chat. If you click on chat, and you can go ahead and put your question for our experts, and we'll try and get that towards the end of our event. But to kick us off, we are going to welcome Hollie Stark. Hollie is the Outreach Program Manager at the Washington Emergency Management Division, where she focuses on public education and outreach for Washington's natural hazards and preparedness. Hollie, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Christina. Go ahead to the next slide. So like she said, I'm Hollie, and I am the Outreach Program Manager here. I work in what we call the Disaster Resilience Unit, and our job is focusing on the things that happen before a disaster, so mitigation and preparedness and protection. And my team specifically works with some of our big three, like tsunamis, earthquakes, and volcanoes, and then some of our more prevalent disasters, which we're going to get into. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, the first thing I always tell people is that Washington is earthquake country. We actually have the second highest earthquake risk in the United States, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what that means. There are some places like Alaska that have way more seismic activity, but risk is measured by the risk to the population and infrastructure. So we just have more of that than Alaska does. California is #1 in the country for earthquake risk. More people, more infrastructure, more earthquakes. But we are there, and we do have 3 different types of fault lines. So we have the big one, which you guys have probably heard of, which is our subduction zone fault line. And we're going to go into that a little bit more later. But we also have what we call the deep fault lines, like they fault on the Juan de Fuca plate. And that's what you would have experienced if you were here for the Nisqually quake in 2001. That's a deep fault. So it's really deep down in the earth, but it can still be very intense, produce very large magnitude earthquakes. And those recurrence rates, or how often it happens, is every 30 to 50 years. And then we also have crustal faults, which are very shallow. That would be like the Seattle fault and the Tacoma fault, and they would cause very large earthquakes and the possibility of tsunamis on our inner coast. All right. Here's just a small map you can kind of view of significant earthquakes here in the state since 1872. The red dots mean that they were a magnitude 6.0 or greater. So you can see they have happened historically and they will happen again. This is a little bit of what we saw during the Nisqually quake. This was up in Seattle. This is a building that we call unreinforced masonry, or URM, and that's when the brick was not secured to the building the way that we do now with updated building codes. And you can see it just shears off the building. Nisqually happened when a lot of people were in work and in school. And so this didn't cause damage to humans, but it could have been really bad if it was a bright summer day when everybody's out walking around. And these buildings are very prevalent in Washington. We don't know how many there are, but we're working on a survey in our different communities to count them and then find ways for people to be able to retrofit them for earthquake safety. All right, go to the next. All right. Washington also has tsunamis. With earthquake comes tsunamis. We have about 3,000 miles of shoreline, our outer and inner coast, and they're all at risk of tsunamis. That is, when a large column of water is disrupted on the ocean floor and it sends a series of waves towards our shore. The most common cause is earthquakes, but they can also be caused by landslides, volcanic activity, and in really rare instances, meteors. So, all right, go ahead to the next. So we can experience what you call a local tsunami, which means the generation point that was here nearby. The most likely cause of a local tsunami would be the Cascadia subduction zone. And you're shaking, the earthquake is your primary warning that there's going to be a tsunami. So if you experience an earthquake that is strong enough and long enough to knock you to the ground, it lasts for several minutes, you're most likely going to experience a tsunami. And so we tell people that's your first and most natural warning sign. You might not hear the sirens. You might not even have enough time to get a warning on your phone. If you experience that shaking, drop cover and hold, and then get to high ground immediately. The inundation will be heavy. There will be severe currents. It will impact our coast, both the outer and inner. All right, next. And then we are also at risk of what we call distant tsunamis. That means the source is somewhere far away. It could have been Japan. It could have been Argentina. It could be Kamchatka, Russia, which we were under an advisory for very recently. Our most likely source of a distant tsunami that would be really impactful to us would be Alaska. In this case, your warning wouldn't be the earthquake. You wouldn't feel it. So you need to rely on other warning sources such as our siren system, the wireless emergency alerts that you get to your phone, or a NOAA weather radio. It will be less impactful just because there's more time for it to get across, and we do have more time to evacuate our population, but still very dangerous, especially if you're on the outer coast. So when you receive those warnings, or if you hear the outdoor siren network, again, get inland into high ground as fast as you can. All right, so a little bit more about our Cascadia subduction zone. You may have seen that very famous article about the big one, and it would be. It's about 700 miles long. It goes from the bottom of British Columbia, Canada, and then dovetails right into the top part of California. It's capable of producing a magnitude 9.0 earthquake that would be felt far and wide. It's probably about 4 to 6 minutes of shaking. So if you were here for Nisqually, by comparison, that earthquake was 45 seconds. So you're thinking of 3 to 6 minutes of shaking. It last ruptured in 1700 on January 26th, and we know that from historical record from the native populations that have stories, as well as seismic core sampling of our Earth, ghost tsunamis, and then records in Japan. It has what we call a recurrence interval of every 300 to 600 years. So if you do the math, we are in the window of possibility for that to happen. Now, a lot of people like to say we're due for a big one. We don't like to talk about it like it's an overdue library book, but it is possible. It will happen again. We don't know if it will be in our lifetimes, but it's better to be prepared than not. All right, and then we have new updated modeling on our website for casualties and building loss. And you can see in yellow at the bottom of this, we expect 50 to 65,000 plus casualties in Washington alone. And then Washington also has 5 active volcanoes. I can't really see you, but you can kind of sit and pause a moment. Does anybody recognize this mountain? Because it doesn't look the same anymore. Go to the next slide. So that was Mount St. Helens prior to its 1980 eruption. We also have Glacier Peak, Mount Baker, Mount Rainier, and Mount Adams, and they are all considered active volcanoes. So basically what we say is they're just in a state of just magma, and then they would be active again. If you are into the news, you may have seen that we had a recent swarm of earthquake activity on Mount Rainier. That was not related to volcanic activity. It was just a movement of water in the mountain. But it is always a good reminder that, hey, it is a volcano and we need to be prepared for things that could happen. Next slide. So here is a list of eruptions in the Cascade Mountain Range, including ours and Oregon's and California's. And so when we talk about active, we mean in geology time. So in the last 4,000 years. But again, they could happen and probably will happen again. Okay, next slide. Some of the impacts that would happen in case of an eruption: volcanic ash, which if you saw yesterday, it lasts forever. So the wind picked up the ash from the Mount St. Helens eruption yesterday and sent it all over the place. If you were here during Mount St. Helens, you know that the ash was crazy. It caused visibility problems, breathing problems. We have, things like big boulders. The biggest one on the bottom there is what we call a lahar. That's one of the big impacts that you would expect to see from Mount Rainier, which is these big rivers of mud that come down the river channels from our mountains. And then they pick up steam and they pick up all sorts of debris, anything in its way, really. And similar to a tsunami, the protective action is to get to high ground away from those river channels. All right, next slide. All right. And then we also talk about some of our other hazards. So what are some of Washington's other hazards? This is a really cool map of the United States and some of the major impacts that you could have. But the actual number one hazard that we have here in Washington is flooding. All 39 of our counties have experienced some level of disaster because of a flood, and they can happen in all different times. We talk about it a lot after wildfire season because those burn scars can be really damaging if you get heavy rains right afterward, and we get severe winter storms that cause a lot of flooding, and they're just prevalent and they come fast and they cause a lot of damage. Are you 2 weeks ready? So in Washington, we like to tell people that they need to be at least 2 weeks ready. And that comes from a lot of exercises we do when we practice for the big one, tsunami and earthquake. Just a lot of our communities are going to become micro islands, be stranded because of the infrastructure damage. And it takes a lot longer than we expected to get those systems back online. So are you 2 weeks ready? And what does that mean? So next slide. I'm going to go through them real quick because I know Tessa has a lot of cool information too. We do 3 steps to preparedness. The first is know your hazards and then reduce your risk to those hazards. The second step is make plans. And then the third is gather supplies. So we'll go through those really quick. Next, reduce your risk. We already talked about our hazards. The first thing I tell everybody to do is sign up for alerts. So you've got either the link there, mil.wa.gov/alerts, or the QR code, which takes you to the same page. There you can sign up for your local jurisdiction alerts so you know what's happening in your area. Those are opt-in. They don't spam you. You can learn about the wireless emergency alert system that you get on your phone. You can also learn about NOAA weather radios, as well as signing up for volcano notifications and earthquake early warning. So it's a great resource for everybody. And I know Christina will send it in the communications. All right, next. Another thing you can do is a home hazard hunt. You can do that for earthquake. You can do that if you live in a wildland urban interface for wildfires. And there's all sorts of different things you can do, you know, tying your TV down, hanging your pictures very carefully. Do not put them over your bed. We like to say, hey, if you've got a bowling ball collection, let's not put that over your bed. All the way up to securing your water heaters, removing debris from your gutter, creating defensible space around your home, those kinds of things. So anything from small, the smallest one I like to do at night is I make sure that I have a clear path from my bed to my bathroom and from my bed to any exit from my home, just a small little hazard removed from the nighttime where we might not be fully awake or it might be dark. Putting shoes by your bed and a flashlight, a light source in case of any debris from any sort of hazard. All right, next slide. And then one more, reduce risk. We participate and run the Great Washington Shakeout, which takes place on the third Thursday of every October, where you can practice your earthquake protection, drop, cover, and hold on. And there you can go to shakeout.org/Washington and sign up. And one last thing about that, which I'm going to put in the chat, is that we are hosting, Washington Emergency Management is hosting a webinar specifically geared toward long-term care facilities and how to hold a shakeout drill and what you need to do for learning about earthquake safety. So I put that link in the chat for you. All right, next. The next step is make plans. And I'm sorry, this is so text heavy. When I talk about plans, I talk about the big three that are in that first bullet point. What are your communication plans? What are your evacuation plans? And what are your reunification plans? And then the rest of the bullets are like, who do you need to make those plans for? Is it your kids? Is it your pets? Is it somebody you care for? And as much as possible, involve everybody in making those plans. So everybody's empowered to make the right choice when it happens. And then the last thing that I always say, practice those plans. Practice them in the dark or in inclement weather. Take any opportunity you can to just practice what you would do or talk about it with your family or your neighbors or your dependents, and then make that a permanent part of your lifestyle. Right, next. Last but not least, we say gather supplies, or you may have heard it's called build kits. So we want you to have that easy to grab and go kit for your work, for your car, for your home, but building toward having 2 weeks worth of supplies and skills that you need in your home. And remember, preparedness is a journey. You could be like the guy in the beginning, not knowing what to do. Hopefully after today, you've got a couple actionable steps. And you might be like the guy that's best and beyond, but it's always a continuing journey. And you got to keep going, restocking, relearning supplies, getting to know your neighbors, and carrying that message forward. Last slide for me. Lots of links and QR codes. We talked about most of them. The most important one I would say is go to that alerts page. And if you have any questions for me or my team of experts in those geologic hazards, you can go to that email, public.education. We do webinars and presentations. We're out all month for National Preparedness Month at Expo. So come find us, come talk to us. We love to share the information and get people more prepared. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hollie. We really appreciate you being on. And I have recorded some questions that have come across towards the end. And just a reminder, if anyone has questions for our experts, feel free to drop it into the chat and we'll try and get to it at the end. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to our team from SBP. SBP is a disaster resilience and recovery nonprofit. And today we have Tessa, Baran, and Lyanne Ortiz, who are going to present. Tessa is the Prepare Program Associate at SBP. And before that, she served the state of South Carolina in disaster recovery and mitigation, where she coordinated dozens of resilience-focused projects. Tessa also brings experience from her work with the Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability in Annapolis, Maryland. And we're also joined by Lyanne. Lyanne is the Community Preparedness Engagement Manager at SBP, where she leads national efforts to strengthen disaster readiness. She has hands-on experience supporting recovery efforts in Puerto Rico, Texas, and Florida, and she brings a deep expertise to her role. Lyanne also supports AmeriCorps initiatives in Louisiana and Puerto Rico, focusing on equitable access to preparedness and recovery resources for vulnerable communities. And we are so fortunate to have you both with us today. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and hand it off to you, Tessa, I think, to begin.
Thanks so much, Christina. And thank you, Hollie, for getting us kicked off with a really important in-depth look at different risks across the state. So like Christina said, just a little bit of background on SBP, and then we'll dive right in and we'll start talking through some specific actions that we really want to encourage folks to take throughout the year as we're thinking about ways that we can continue to better prepare ourselves, our families, and our community. We are, again, a disaster resilience and recovery nonprofit, and we got our start in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So we've been in operation for over 2 decades at this point. In our early days, we focused really heavily on getting folks back home and getting families and individuals back into safe, sanitary, and secure housing and living conditions. In those 2 decades since our org got our start, we've realized that in order to reach this main mission that you see outlined on the slide here of shrinking the time between disaster events and recovery, then we have to be more proactive and we have to get ahead of disasters. It means that we have to be thinking about disaster preparedness and what we can do to build long-term resilience. We really drastically expanded out since our start the scope of our operations and what we seek to do as an organization in efforts towards becoming more proactive and, again, getting ahead of disasters. So you could see here that I've categorized some of our main program areas across the organization, with disaster preparedness being this category in the middle here, and that's where Lyanne and myself are situated. But as you can see, we really try to work across the disaster cycle with the end goal here of helping folks at the individual and community level build towards becoming more disaster resilient. To offer here a little bit more information about our preparedness program, and then we're going to really shift gears and get into some of these actionable steps. We know, unfortunately, there will be another disaster, and Hollie explained this really well, walking through again some of those main risks throughout the state of Washington. While we can't stop disaster events from happening, we absolutely can take action ahead of disasters to get ourselves prepared. And ultimately, what that means is reducing risks and keeping ourselves and our families and our properties safe. That is the most important thing when it comes to disaster preparedness is safety and well-being of individuals, family members, community members, etc. We work in our preparedness program with a variety of different groups, including households. So we work direct to household with homeowners and renters. We work with businesses of various sizes, and we often work with community leaders, practitioners, those that are well connected in communities. And AARP Washington is certainly a wonderful example of that. We have here, and the link will get dropped in the chat pretty soon here, but a link at the bottom of the screen to our resource hub. Once we wrap up today, if you go to our resource hub, you'll see that we have a variety of resources that span different disaster preparedness and recovery topics. So this includes things like guides, and we have 2 screenshots on the slide here of some of our guides. We have videos that are short form, quick actions to take across a variety of different preparedness topics. We have longer form videos, we have trainings, etc. So we really try to offer a wide breadth of resources for folks to utilize to continue along their preparedness journey. With that, we're going to get into our content here, and I will pass it over to Lyanne to get us into topic 1 of knowing your risks, a continuation of what Hollie has laid out for us at the start of the session.
Thank you, Tessa, and hello, everyone. Happy to be here today. We're starting with understanding your risk because we like to say to be able to properly prepare, you first need to know what you're preparing for, right? And again, a big thank you to Hollie because you laid an excellent foundation today as we go into local risk and the resources surrounding them. Next slide, please. So we're experiencing a major shift. Like it's no longer about traditional high-risk zones, not just only about them, but it's also about the extreme natural events that are happening more often and how they're becoming much stronger. And what's really concerning is that a lot of communities that were also even considered low risk are now also very vulnerable. So we're going to take a moment to look at this data point over here in yellow in the corner to reflect on what it's sharing. It says between 2011 and 2024, 40 states, so that's 80% of the US, experienced 10 or more major disaster declarations. And that's not just a handful of isolated events. So that means that in 28 of those states, every county, and we're talking urban, rural, coastal, inland, faced at least one major disaster. And Hollie shared earlier that all of the counties in the state, or the majority of them, had experienced different disaster events, most of those being flooding. So this clearly just demonstrates how widespread the impact has become and why it's also so important to use trusted resources such as your local emergency management office. Or you can also use visual tools like Risk Factor or the National Risk Index, in which you can plug in your address or your location of preference to understand what your risks are in your community, in your home, but also those places that you recurrently frequent. Next slide, please. So we just talked about how important it is to gain insight about current and future risks, right? And the next step that we want you to take is to make sure that you're staying informed through trusted resources about imminent threats so you can be able to stay safe and also take those quick actions as you need. So we encourage you here to take a look at your local and weather news apps and download those, to keep a NOAA weather radio powered and ready in case signals are lost. Something that we see often is that maybe it's not powered or maybe you don't have batteries with it, right? And to download any emergency and weather applications to stay updated about what's going on. So here we have the FEMA app, which has a lot of great resources and provides a lot of updates on what's going on. And then one of my favorites also is the Red Cross emergency app. So this is going to allow you to monitor multiple locations, but it's also going to include different alerts if something is happening in that area, whether the one you're at or the other location that you listed as important. But something also really nice about both of these apps is that they have great learning tools for you to continue understanding what your risks are and also how to navigate them. Another essential step, and to echo the words of Hollie, please make sure that you're signing up for your city and county's alert system. You can do this by using the link she shared, or if not, if you can't do that at the moment, look up your city or county along with emergency alerts and a link should pop up, because it's going to be very important to subscribe, because these systems are going to give you not only timely updates on critical information, but it's also going to give you those weather warnings, any public health alerts, major events. So please take a moment to register yourself. And if you're already registered, maybe talk with a loved one to see if they're registered as well. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about supporting older adults, the key here is to make preparedness practical and approachable, because it could get very heavy sometimes to think about these things. So you can start by exploring some risk tools together, and you can focus on one at a time so it feels manageable and not overwhelming. Then you can give opportunities to practice, whether that is, okay, how does it look like signing up for local alerts? Let's download those apps and then interact in them. How do we use them? Or you can help them programming a favorite news or weather channel so they can have quick access to that information. And so you're making sure that information is coming from a trusted source. Another thing you can do, and I'm a big fan of this one, is to set recurring reminders to check your forecast and to check those apps as well so they can create a routine. And it's also very important to make sure that information is relevant for them. So it's connecting it to real life disasters, maybe one that they remember, maybe one they've experienced, maybe one that they've read about in the past, so they can connect a little bit more like, hey, this is something that's happened in the past, or this is something that could happen here. And they can use that as a learning point. Another great thing you can do is you can pair those digital tools we just talked about with printed materials. So they have a backup or also a resource in which they can read through it, discuss it, highlight, but also connect it with what they're seeing digitally. Or if not, if they don't prefer a digital tool, give them something tangible. And take time again to walk through what is listed there. What are those tips? What are those steps that they can take? And you can point them to different resources like the one listed here, which is the FEMA's Disaster Preparedness Guide for older adults, or any trusted resources from whether that be your local emergency management that they might have. That would be a good resource for them to get read up on what they can do to get better prepared. Next slide. And with that, I'll pass it back to Tessa. Thank you.
Thanks, Lyanne. We'll spend a little bit of time now talking about how to best protect your home. And we'll look at this in a couple of different categories. And the first is going to be inspections and maintenance actions. As I walk through some of these actions that we want to encourage folks to take, looking at both the inside of the house and the outside, I want to start by saying it is our top recommendation to engage in different inspections and maintenance actions at least once a year, if not more. So when we're talking about the inside of the home, these first 3 bullet points here are really speaking to the importance of ensuring that your home is properly weatherized. And so what this means is when it's cold, we want the warm air to stay inside of our home, and vice versa. When it's hot outside, we want to make sure that things are staying cool inside of the house. We're well on our way into the fall at this point, but we've just wrapped up a summer season. And so I'm sure folks are well aware of the fact that, we deal with extreme heat increasingly more throughout the nation. And so certainly important in the summertime, again, as we just experienced, that we are keeping ourselves cool and comfortable and safe. It's a huge health concern to ensure that our homes are properly weatherized at any time throughout the year. So with that being said, a couple of actions here are things like inspecting your heating and cooling systems, your water heaters, making sure that they're in good shape, in good repair, and if any repairs have to be made, that those are happening in a timely manner. And so what that really is dependent on is you're inspecting them and making sure that you're staying on top of any changes that need to happen. Changing furnace filters, and then also inspecting the caulk, weather stripping, and insulation throughout your home, around doors, around windows, etc. We also know that unfortunately during disasters, they can be, of course, really dangerous. And so anything that we can do before a disaster hits to help keep ourselves and our families safe is going to go a long way. One way that this looks like is, inspecting your fire alarms, your carbon monoxide detectors, knowing that at any time throughout the year with any disaster type, we can lose power. And so with power outages comes these concerns of carbon monoxide poisoning, et cetera. And so testing fire alarms, again, taking a look at your carbon monoxide detectors is a pretty quick action that you can take yourself or with the support of others that will go a long way in helping to keep you safe. So those are just a couple actions, but those are some key steps we want to encourage folks to take inside of the home. If we're looking at the outside of the home, a couple top steps that we really want folks to be thinking about and keeping top of mind throughout the year is 1, removing dead trees, overhanging limbs near your property, and any yard debris. And this is important for a couple of reasons. 1, if we're talking about high wind events, if we're talking about wildfire events, these items in front of your home, around your home, can either get uplifted, again, if we're talking about high wind events, and go into your home and potentially cause damage, or they can be vegetation that can get ignited and really increase the impact of a wildfire if one does occur in your area. So again, clearing those is a really important step. We'll talk a little bit more and we'll point you to some resources where you can learn more about wildfire preparation, wildfire safety when it comes to making sure your house is in good shape. But things like maintaining non-combustible zones and defensible space around your home. These are perimeter spaces around the perimeter of your home that have different requirements with certain types of vegetation and ground cover, and certain structures like garages or gazebos or play sets, things like that, that have to be at certain areas throughout the outside of your home, so they're not so close that they can then become ignited if a wildfire is incoming. And so again, we'll point to more resources here, but when we're talking about inspections and maintenance, if you do have non-combustible zones or defensible space around your home, we want to make sure that it is going to be able to work to the best of its ability, and in order to do so, they need to be properly maintained. When it comes to clearing gutters, drains, downspouts, this is a really important one across disaster types. Hollie mentioned this, but I'll emphasize that flooding can happen anywhere throughout the country at any time of year, and it is in fact the most common and the most costly of all disaster types. And so if your house does experience heavy rain, a flood event, we want to make sure that those flood waters can get properly diverted away from your home. What does this mean? This means making sure that, again, your drains are cleared, your gutters are cleared, and your downspouts are in good shape. This also really comes into play, and it's really important with wildfires because, and this, really kind of is in the same vein as our first bullet point here under outside of home, but we want to make sure that any vegetation that can ignite and that's combustible is removed from our property. And so that again comes into play here. Of course, also regularly inspecting your roof to make sure it's in good shape is of utmost importance. This is something that me, for example, I won't be climbing on my roof anytime soon to make sure it's in good shape, but of course it's still important. And so this is something that I certainly would bring in professionals and ask any family and friends that are able to do that and know exactly what they're looking for support. So certainly if this is something that you're able to do safely, that's wonderful. Bring in professional support for this action or any others is, very important. And then also here, we'll share links again later on once we follow up after the session today, but want to just point out this home zone checklist that is in, again, checklist format that you can print out, and that's going to go a long way to help ensure that your property is in its best shape and going to reduce the impacts from wildfires should you be impacted. So those are property and inspections and maintenance actions for either you to take if you are an individual that's maintaining your home. But also I know we have folks on the call today that may be supporting older adults, either older adult family members, neighbors, friends, or folks that may be caregivers on the call. And so we really framed this section here of actions that individuals can take and then supportive actions. So walking through some supportive actions, and Lyanne really started to mention this here, but wanting to make sure that we're having conversations. It really boils down to preparedness needs to be top of mind throughout the year. And one way that we can do that is, again, having conversations, wanting to make sure that we're not framing these in an alarmist way, but more so thinking of let's take these steps throughout the year so we can have some peace of mind and for our overall safety. Any older adults that you are supporting in the process of increasing their preparedness, it's absolutely critical to make sure that, any older adults are part of the decision-making process. This is a collaborative exercise that needs to happen year-round. I spoke a little bit when it comes to roofs about bringing in professional help, but again, this can be applicable for any of the actions that we'll talk about. If any of the steps that we recommend are not things that you're comfortable doing yourself, please feel free to bring in professional help to ensure that, you're staying safe and that these actions are taken properly and all the way through. Additional conversations that you can have that go more in depth of, just this from this ground setting piece of why this is important, but get into the nitty gritty of what are those specific needs that older adults might have. Are there generators that are needed that older adults don't have? Are smoke detectors needing to get replaced? Are carbon monoxide detectors needing to get replaced, etc.? Can you provide support after maybe walking through the home with an older adult loved one, making a prioritized list of different upgrades and home improvements that need to occur? Lyanne in the next section here is going to talk through actions that you can take when disasters are imminent. But one step here that you can take is going through the process of helping loved ones label items and make sure that you have designated areas to bring in certain items throughout your home. So that way, when a disaster comes, you don't have to spend time figuring out how to organize yourself. You are organized well in advance and you know exactly what needs to go where. We talked through this already, but again, if this is something that you can support with, it's helping to check fire alarms, carbon monoxide detectors. Again, it's not going to take long, but it certainly is an action that needs to happen. And then regular check-ins. We've said this a couple times, but preparedness happens throughout the year. And so it's not a one and done conversation. It is building on each conversation, maybe on a monthly basis, but knowing that it has to happen regularly. All right, with that, I'll pass it over to Lyanne.
Thank you, Tessa. So to talk about a couple of quick actions you can take before incoming hazards. Next slide. These can help you reduce damage, save money, and honestly, my favorite, avoid unnecessary stress if you're doing them ahead of time. You can start by placing sandbags at entry points or moving those valuable or irreplaceable items off the ground floor. So think documents, electronics, even food and sentimental belongings. So that way you can protect them from water or any debris. If it's more like a storm coming in and you have storm shutters, make sure that you're putting those in early before wind picks up and that you're bringing in outdoor items such as furniture, toys, tools. And if there's anything that cannot be moved indoors, like a shed or a bigger item, make sure that you're securing it properly so it doesn't become a projectile that can impact someone in your home or your actual home or neighbor. Another thing that you can do is unplug any non-essential electrical appliances or use surge protectors, and that way you reduce the risk of damage to all of those appliances. And then when we're thinking about high wind events, you can close interior doors, and this will actually, what it'll do is it'll reduce the pressure on your roof by up to 30%, and it'll prevent structural damage. And in the case of a wildfire, those same closed doors can help slow the spread of fire, it can limit oxygen, it can even reduce smoke infiltration. So just remember, if you do that in the case of a wildfire, that you're leaving them unlocked. So in the case that first responders need to come into your home, they can do so. Another thing that you can do before evacuating or maybe sheltering is to turn on all of those indoor and outdoor lights to make your home easier to locate, whether that be through heavy smoke or darkness. And then if you can, while you're at that too, shut off any heating, air conditioning, ceiling fans, anything that's circulating air so it can stop the circulation of smoke, of ash, or any debris that might be already in the air. And then last but not least, it's very important for us to mention that while these steps are not going to be a guarantee that your home is going to be safe, it can actually make a very meaningful difference in protecting your home and also your loved ones. Next slide. So how can we look at this when we're talking about supporting an older adult? First, start by helping them identify and elevate those valuables, similar to what Tessa was mentioning earlier about labeling and making sure that they know what's in there. They can make sure that they're also taking care of their medications. They know that they're important, where their important documents are and where they're properly secured. And if they have them on the ground floor, again, putting those up, helping them with that process. And then you can also encourage them to bring all those outdoor items inside, similar to what we just talked about. For the times that you might not be nearby, or if you know, in this case, if you're in a very rural area and usually go 1 or 2 hours to go do your groceries and come back, help coordinate with a small support team, whether that be neighbors, friends, family, which you can support each other. Hey, if I'm out of town and something's coming in and I don't have enough time to either prep my home, prep a family member, can you support me with these actions? And also very important, which is something that we've been talking about a lot, is to practice these actions. Like what do I need to do in the process of securing my home quickly? What does that entail? What do I need to do if an emergency alert comes through that I need to exit my home? What is that checklist of items that I need to take care of before I exit home, and where can I get my items? These are good things that you can practice, and something that I've been telling folks lately, but the holidays coming up, you have a lot of people sometimes at home. I know it doesn't sound super fun, but it could be a good activity to do while everyone's at home. And at the end of the day, this is just going to build a lot of confidence, not just in yourself, but the family members or loved ones that you're supporting, because it's going to reduce panic if you already know what you're going to do. If you're role playing, which steps do I need to take in advance? And it's going to make it a lot easier to remember as well. And we have a guide here that we're sharing with folks, and you'll get access to it later afterwards as well, about what you can do to protect your home as well. Next slide, please. And I'll pass it over back to Tessa.
All right, thanks, Lyanne. And we're wrapping up here. This is our last action item, but we're going to talk quickly through some mitigation actions. And we have this bucketed into 2 main categories. The first is budget friendly. And that's because we understand that mitigation actions can sometimes have a hefty price tag associated with them. But with that being the case, these are the most effective ways to reduce the impact of different types of disaster events. And so we want to walk through a couple of these. And so I'll call out just a few for the sake of time. But again, I want to point folks here to these 2 resources, and these also will be shared out once we wrap up the session today. But these are fantastic resources for you to deep dive into that have a lot of great information across a variety of disaster types, of different types of mitigation options that you can implement in your household across different types of budgets. So for one, again, I'll call out maybe 2 or 3 here, but talking about the defensible space beforehand and why it's so important to maintain that. Well, what does that look like? Again, what this means is that around the perimeter of your home at different widths, so there are different types of spaces to defend. There are certain requirements there on what types of vegetation you can have, how spread apart do different trees, bushes, etc. have to be, what ground covering is going to be the most appropriate at what point throughout distance from the house, and things like that. Can you park your car in certain areas? And so again, there's a lot that goes into it, but this is just a really effective methodology to reduce future wildfire impacts. And I'll give a couple other examples here, knowing that flooding is one of the most common disasters that the state of Washington can face. One great thing to consider is replacing carpet with tiles. We know, unfortunately, that if a house is carpeted and if it is impacted by floodwaters, it is nearly impossible to clean that carpet and put it in good repair once again. So it would have to be replaced, and that's expensive. However, if tiles are properly maintained throughout the year and they're in good shape, if a house with tiles experiences flooding, then it should be able to be cleared out again. And so those are just important things to think about. And it always comes back to what are your risks and what are those different actions that can be taken to reduce impacts. This is a little bit of a wordy slide here, and I'll just call out a couple, but really want to point folks to the resources that we have linked here, and that'll be, again, shared when we follow up. But the big 2 takeaways that I'll share here are, I really want to ensure that homes are, when it comes to wildfires, that they are updated, the different components of your home, the roof, the walls, the siding, the doors, with non-combustible materials. So with these different types, these different components of a home, there are different materials that are most appropriate. So for example, when it comes to non-combustible siding for a home, if you're in a place where you can repair that and make different types of upgrades, things that you'll want to consider are brick, metal, etc. When it comes to exterior doors, you'll want to consider material like steel and fiberglass. But again, the idea here is just knowing, this is an introductory look at what these different actions are. And when it comes to mitigation, just knowing that there are options out there that you can consider when the time is right, when the budget is right, to again reduce your impacts. And I also just want to make a quick call out here to Fortified. Fortified is a set of construction and re-roofing standards that has been scientifically proven to reduce the impacts of a variety of disaster types, high wind, hail, hurricanes, etc. And so across the nation, this is something that folks really want to encourage folks to be thinking about. But particularly when it comes to areas that are wildfire prone, there is also a wildfire standard that is comprised of different wildfire mitigation actions at the household level that folks can consider to really reduce impacts. And so again, I know I'm being pretty quick here, but we'll just wrap up with pointing you again to these resource links that'll either be dropped in the chat or followed up with, but wanting to just walk through a couple things here when it comes to supporting any older adults that are in your network. You'll see a little bit of repetition here with this first bullet point, but it really starts with these conversations and making discussions about disaster preparedness regular and normal for folks to have. So whether that's about past experiences or really going into depth with any older adults in your network, talking about different risks that they face and what are different mitigation options to consider, starting with maybe those more budget-friendly options and then gradually increasing to those that are bigger ticket, more expensive. Again, an additional theme that you'll see here is the importance of bringing in a professional to maybe walk through in depth what this looks like. What is the timeline? What is the price of implementing some of these different mitigation options? And then, of course, pointing any older adults, and for your awareness as well, of what are local resources, local agencies or nonprofits, or any local grants and tax incentives that might be available for implementing different mitigation options. And so we're wrapping up quickly here. And so we'll just do this last resource section because we have a couple of great resources we want to share out with folks. And then we will open it up for a few questions once we conclude. Back to you, Lyanne.
Thank you, Tessa, and thank you everyone for sticking along. Just wrapping everything up here with a couple of key takeaways. So we'd like for you to make sure that you're knowing the risks in your area and that you're staying informed with local alerts. Make sure that you're gathering all those essential supplies and creating a household emergency plan. There's no better day like today to get started with that. Learn safety actions for different disasters because there's many risks in the state of Washington. Make sure that you're maintaining and securing your home to reduce damage, and then use trusted resources for guidance, not just for yourself, but as you're sharing with others. And last but not least, make sure that you're taking time to help older adults and other folks with access and functional needs within your community so that they can prepare as well. Next slide, please. As you can see on the screen, and as Hollie shared earlier today, there's a lot of great, amazing local resources available for you to help you prepare, to help you navigate disaster, and also help you recover from them. They offer a lot of practical tools and resources to keep you, your home, and your community informed. So make sure that you're checking all these out. The best practice is to recurrently visit these pages. Even if you've seen them maybe a couple of months ago, go back in there, see if there are any updates, any new resources, or anything that's currently available in your area that could help you get better prepared. Next slide. And we've referred to a lot of resources from SBP's end throughout the session, and you can find them all here on SBP's website. So if you want more information on getting prepared for disasters or navigating recovery, you can visit our resource hub here. You're going to find a variety of content to explore, to engage with, from videos and things you can download and share with others. Next slide. And then I'll pause here so everyone can use the QR code or the chat and the link in the chat that we've just dropped to take this survey. It's really going to help all of us understand what you've learned, what you found helpful, and if there are any areas of improvement or topics that you want to hear learn more about in the future. So we're dropping that in, and I believe that's going to be shared afterwards as well. And then for sake of time, I'll pass it over to the next slide. Thank you. Before we move on to the Q&A portion, we want to thank you all for joining us today. But we also want to give a big thank you from SBP's end to AARP State Office, Christina and Bruce and all of them over there, and to the Washington Emergency Management Division for their support and for organizing, again, such a fantastic webinar series. And I'll turn it over to Christina for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lyanne and Hollie and Tessa, for all of the information. We do have a few questions that we maybe can get through today. And just a reminder, I know we have had some comments that some folks attended last week's session, and today we are kind of compiling all of the information, and then we anticipate hopefully sending an email either once we have this recording ready, either like Friday or early next week. So all of that content is coming together at one spot. So one of the questions that came up is, how do we find disaster shelters in our area?
It's a really good question, and the best answer I can give you is that it's really community dependent and disaster dependent. So shelters are typically, they have a memorandum of understanding with, say, a community center or a school, and then they're opened based on need. So you really generally won't find a list in your community. You're only going to find them when that disaster is happening. So I would say follow your local emergency management, your local law enforcement, and really understand who your trusted sources of information are, because that's when you're going to get that information. It's because, you know, if you have a school that's by a river, well, that's not a great shelter during a flooding, but it might be away from wildfire and it's open at that time.
The great driving home the importance of signing up for your local alerts, because
it's really important.
That information should be shared. Another question, and as someone who actually lives in an HOA and is on the board, we had a question saying, are there any special plans for condos or apartments that HOA board members can share with communities? Or maybe we just share everything that we've already shared.
Yes, so a lot of times with HOAs, especially, or, you know, like a retirement community, is what I get often is that they're taking it upon themselves to organize. So we do have a lot of community organization tips, checklists for sharing skills and resources, how to go out and talk to your neighbor. But the important thing is that you do that and find out who your block captain might be or who's leading the charge and how you can help.
It's a good point. We are in my community. We're small. We only have about 20 homes, but we're going to try and get everybody to participate in the shakeout. We'll see if that can happen. Here's something super kind of specific to the Puget Sound area. And Holly, I don't know if there is an answer to this. Are there alternative routes if I-5 bridges are destroyed?
That's going to be a Washington State Department of Transportation question. And again, I believe it's going to be very disaster dependent. We're not going to really know until we see what the damage actually is.
Thanks. And the final one is, hey, Holly, how far inland could a tsunami go in Puget Sound?
So if you're looking at the Puget Sound, if we're talking about a Cascadia generated tsunami, we expect from the modeling the waves to reach a height of 3 to 5 feet. So not incredibly far inland. The primary damage will be to our maritime infrastructure, ports, harbors, marinas, that kind of stuff. If you live on shore, it's definitely good to, batten down the hatches and go inland while it's happening. But the good thing about being in the Puget Sound, unless it's a local, like a Seattle fault, is that you have time. You'll have about 2 hours.
It's great to know. I was recently down along the Oregon coast for a vacation, and I was telling a friend, it's funny, as I'm going down, it's like entering tsunami zone, exiting tsunami zone, entering. So like being aware of what is prevalent and possible in your specific community is incredibly important.
Yep, where you live, work, and play.
Exactly. I wanted to, Tessa or Holly or Lyanne, just wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything else you want to share or something that we forgot. No? Great. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We know that you have many choices of how you spend your day, and we really appreciate you spending part of it with us. Again, we will be following up with everyone with the content that we shared for both sessions and the resources, and we hope that it was helpful in preparing you and your family. Thank you so much. Have a great day.